actually, this next story you brought up. You told me this right before the show. I completely missed this. So I want to make sure that the viewers know about this, the listeners at home, because we're getting into fantasy football championship season, and those deeper players could impact your league. Diontae Johnson has been suspended by the Baltimore Ravens, not by the NFL, by the Ravens. And so I'll let you get into this a little bit more, but this is big because they just traded for him. So what do we got?
Yeah, it was pretty interesting because not 2 weeks ago or so, maybe a little over 2 weeks ago, but the Steelers played the Ravens, and Diontae Johnson was in the game, and he had mentioned that, Steelers fans, and I'm not necessarily the fans, but the Steelers organization as a whole really showed him a lot of love, and he seemed like he was on a good track. He was happy to be in Baltimore. He was in Carolina for a small stint, had his moments, obviously had some up and down injuries and whatnot. I mean, Diontae Johnson being Diontae Johnson, but he went to Baltimore. He was healthy. He looked like he was getting himself involved. And during the Philadelphia Eagles-Ravens game this past Sunday, it's being reported that at some point in the game, Diontae Johnson just refused to go in. There's really not, I haven't read too far into it. There hasn't really been anything more said about it. But Diontae Johnson, as directed by the coach, said, hey, go in. And he was just like, nah. And that being said, resulted in a Baltimore Ravens organizational suspension. And I just think it's a little interesting because they just traded for him. Like we said, he was going to be kind of more of an asset in that Ravens offense that has very small windows in regards to wide receivers, because you have Zay Flowers and then the wide receiver drop off is kind of, there. I mean, Bateman, I get it, is pretty decent. Nelson Aguilar just never seems to be able to catch anything. You still have Likely and Mark Andrews as well as Derrick Henry on the, as a running back wide receiver type thing, but they can only do so much. Same thing with Justice Hill, but we really thought that Diontae Johnson would be a little bit more involved in the offense, and he was going to be, but then something sparked in his head and he just decided that he just didn't want to go in, which results in his inevitable suspension, which will only be for one game. It's just this Sunday. I don't know who Baltimore plays off the top of my head. And the Giants, which I don't think it should be too much of a threat to Baltimore, but nonetheless, they're going to be without DJ for a week, and hopefully maybe the suspension will maybe help Diontae Johnson figure out what's going on with him. Maybe there's a little bit more there that's causing some issues that made him not want to go in the game. But this isn't good behavior at all, especially for a player that's brand new to the team. I mean, even if you were old to the team, I mean, as soon as I heard about it, I immediately thought of Antonio Brown and his whole situation of him, not necessarily not going into the game, but him throwing his jersey off and running away in the middle of that Jets Buccaneers game. And so I think about that, and I think about him having a little temper tantrum and getting traded to the Raiders and stuff. But nonetheless, DJ is suspended for this week, and I'm assuming it'll be just 1 week. But but from a fantasy perspective, from a Ravens normal perspective, you probably shouldn't have anything to worry about. You're going up against the Giants this week. It's not rivalry. It's not anything like that. You should be fine. But from a fantasy perspective, you may want to consider trying to pick somebody else up. I don't know what type of players or how many players are in your league, or players as in teams. I don't know how many teams are in your league, but definitely probably go pick somebody up if you don't have somebody to replace him. But then again, I don't really see a lot of people utilizing him in not deep leagues. 10 and 12 leagues, I don't think people are utilizing him in anything more than 12. You might be a little cooked. You may have to go and look for Trey Tucker might be available. Westbrook, whatever his name is, I can't even say it. It's like Westbrook. Inouye or whatever. Yeah, he's
a tight end, isn't he?
No, he's a receiver.
He's a receiver. Okay.
Yeah, he gets 3 receptions for 90 yards and a touchdown each game. He's been really consistent over the last 3 or 4 games. He's always obviously a really good waiver wire pickup, especially in deep leagues. And if you need somebody to replace DJ, and nobody's really picking him up. People are just kind of looking past him because he's a Titans player. But I wouldn't if you want the points.
Okay. Well, Yeah, I think this is interesting because obviously Baltimore wanted Diontae Johnson because
they traded for him.
They traded a day 3 pick for him, which I mean that's not like we have to have him, but I mean it's something. And I saw comments like everyone was looking at, they're like Diontae Johnson has 0 fantasy points, and the comments on a lot of those posts were like, oh well, yeah, he sucks.
I was no, it had nothing to do with that.
I don't think so.
It's a very different situation than like Mike Williams in Pittsburgh. Like the Steelers are genuinely not using Mike Williams right now, whereas the Baltimore Ravens are genuinely trying to use Diontae Johnson. He just doesn't want to be used.
But like he's a good player, so I don't know why. I want to know why he didn't want to go in against the Eagles. Did he ever have this problem in Pittsburgh?
No, I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, he never really had. I mean, from what we know, I mean, he had his issues, but he never had anything like this drastic where we had to do like an organization suspension or have any problems with him, like not going into games. I mean, sometimes he would give half effort and like not always force plays. I mean, he was kind of at moments like Claypool and like different ways like that. But I mean, he came in clutch when he needed to. I mean, he was never like a top tier receiver, like some of the like George Pickens or even Antonio Brown, if you want to keep going further and further back. But I mean, he was a good, solid, in many organizational terms for the NFL, he was a good wide receiver too. And I think he would have been, I think he would be pretty solid in Baltimore if he would give himself the chance. But I don't know. I'm looking forward. I guess Baltimore just has to accept the fact that Diontae Johnson's probably not going to be their wide receiver too. Because if he continues a lot of these problems, because like I said, in Pittsburgh, he didn't have a lot of these problems from what I know. Like I said, he had his moments where he was kind of like diva-y, but I feel like everybody in Pittsburgh has their moments where they're kind of diva-y. I mean, you can go back Pickens, Kenny Pickett, Diontae Johnson, Chase Claypool. You can even go back as further as Le'Veon Bell, Big Ben. You can keep going further and further back. I mean, everyone kind of has their moments, but never like this. But I think people in Baltimore might have to slowly accept. I mean, if he continues this behavior up, that they might just have to roll with Bateman, Aguilar, Flowers, and their team. I mean, unless they draft a wide receiver, which they could have with that day 3 pick.
This is so weird. I'm going to continue to follow this because I think this is fascinating. I would think if you went from the Carolina Panthers to the Baltimore Ravens, you would be ecstatic to get on the field.
And especially since like Baltimore's like actually like a competitor this year. I mean, Carolina's not going to be competing for anything until, and definitely not this year, maybe next year if they get lucky, but more than likely in another couple of years. So I don't know. I definitely, I would, like I said, I'd be ecstatic, especially considering that even if Baltimore doesn't win the division in the North, they're still going to be the 5th seed most likely in the race. And that's still good. And they'll probably end up having to play. Well, it'll depend on where Pittsburgh and Houston and everyone finish, depending on the seeds and stuff. So we'll see.